Greetings, everyone. I'm Martha Zavala, President of the League of Women Voters Pasadena area. We dedicate today's program to honoring the many contributions of Black Americans to the advancement of civil liberties and voting rights. Happy Black History Month to everyone. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome you to our League at Night Climate Action and the Inflation Recovery Act. We all know change is not easy. We face a momentous reality. If we do not change, climate change is going to bring change to all of us, and not for the better. So what can we do? The biggest change is that human beings must stop burning fossil fuels like gasoline, coal, and gas. Those give off a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is what's causing climate change. This is not a faraway problem, nor a problem that has to be solved at the United Nations. If you are in Pasadena right now, you may know that 55% of electricity you are using at this minute is being charged with the electricity that was made by burning coal and methane gas. That's a lot of greenhouse gases. This must change. So each of the 13 cities in our area has a somewhat different electric power source situation, but we are all on the journey to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. The question is, can we do it fast enough? And the answer is yes. I'm proud to say that the Pasadena Area League is a coalition partner of the Pasadena 100, which on January 30th succeeded in persuading the Pasadena City Council to pass a resolution hastening the transition to 100% carbon-free electric power by 2030. This is an action designed to give city public servants the go-ahead to pull out all the stops to achieve a full transition to renewable energy with zero GHG gas emissions. So let's cheer the City Council's decision. I think that was very heroic and fantastic, following the footsteps of many other city councils across the nation. I'm also proud that the US League and nationwide local leagues have adopted the 10 Actions Platform, which identifies 10 specific actions that local governments can take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The 10 climate actions are happening at the local government level because local governments make decisions about electric power supply, building codes, solar permits, vehicle fleet procurement, appliance rebates, to name only a few. Local action is the key to success. Local officials care about their constituents and want winning strategies for their cities. You'll hear more about the 10 climate actions later in the program. Let's see, a show of hands, how many local government participants do we have with us tonight? Go down to your reactions button in the bottom and raise your hand, please. The rest of you have your reaction button. You can clap for them. Let's just see how many people we have, because this is very important. You know, the responsibilities you shoulder for the communities are amazing. And I think we recognize that and really want to thank you, especially for being here today, because we know your interest is real and that you're committed to making change happen. But again, you know, change is not easy and it's not free. There are cost implications. That's why we have invited you to this webinar. Fortunately, last year, the US Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which provides grants and loans that will help local governments make the change we need. Our guest speaker today, Megan Pasek, is well qualified to help us understand how the IRA can help us make that change. And now for some logistics and program details. Our speaker will present for about 30 minutes. This will be followed by an interactive Q&A session. I encourage all of you to participate by entering questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat. Our events team and Zoom hosts use this function to communicate with each other and with our panelists. Just to let you know, Pasadena Media is live broadcasting the event on public access TV, and a video will be posted on our website, the website's YouTube channel, in a couple of days. And now I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Bill Kelly, a member of our Natural Resources Committee, who will introduce our speaker and moderate the Q&A session. Bill.
Thank you, Martha. So tonight we're going to be learning about the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes a projected $369 billion over the next 10 years for energy security and climate change programs. And we're going to be hearing more about this and what it could mean for this area locally from Megan Pasek. She's Policy Director of Climate Mayors, which is a group of 750 cities plus that is pledged to reduce greenhouse gases and to uphold the Paris Agreement by doing what they can locally. Megan works in Washington, D.C. at Climate Mayors. Prior to joining Climate Mayors, she served in Congress working for several committees, the Select Committee on Climate Crisis, Natural Resources Committee, and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. She has a master's degree in science on energy policy from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. At least it used to be in Baltimore. I want to just, have everyone thank her in advance. She spent a lot of time getting ready for this and dealt with a lot of correspondence from people. So Megan, welcome. I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll hear questions after you finish your presentation.
Thanks, Bill, for those kind words. And a little bit about my bio and background. I worked for a few members in Congress that focused on some of those committees, but very excited to be talking to you all in my current role with Climate Mayors. And again, as Bill mentioned, my name is Megan Pasek, and I am the Policy Director for Climate Mayors. And our organization is very fortunate to partner with our friends at C40 Cities and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network on this guidebook that I'll be sharing a little bit more about related to the Inflation Reduction Act for local governments. And as all of you, I'm sure, have sort of parsed through since the legislation came through and was passed back in August of last year, it's a very complex piece of legislation with a lot of opportunities. And I'm sure you all are very aware there's a lot of questions that come with that and the perspectives for local government. So hopefully I can break through some of that a little bit today and talk through a little bit more in the Q&A. Next slide. So a little bit about Climate Mayors for those who might not know about the organization. Climate Mayors was founded back in 2014 and is a bipartisan network of over 500 mayors across the US, representing most states. And we are the largest and most diverse in terms of scale of climate mayor groups in the country. We, again, not only represent large US cities, but we're also representing a lot of small and mid-sized cities as well. And we work with mayors, sort of as the name assumes, on climate action and to advance federal climate priorities. If folks on the call know of mayors that might be interested and want to become members, feel free to reach out to me after the presentation. I'm happy to connect you with my colleague who can provide more information on what it means to be a member of this fabulous organization. Next slide. So we know that cities and local leaders have been leading the charge on climate for some time now, and we're excited to be at this point in time where we have the full support of the federal government with unprecedented levels of funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is and can be paired with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the CHIPS and Science Act. This is an incredible opportunity to move from incremental change that we've seen on climate change to transformational change. And our organization also recognizes that that there is a charge to be made to take full advantage of these opportunities. And our leadership wants to make sure that we're supporting local governments to maximize the climate and equity benefits of these bills. Next slide. So our agenda for the next 20 or so minutes, and again, this presentation is mostly going to be following the guidebook that Climate Mayors released back in end of October of last year. So I also definitely recommend folks, if they haven't already, looking through our guidebook after this presentation. And again, I'll be sort of presenting a high-level overview of what's in there and some of the programs cities can take advantage of. We'll walk through the Inflation Reduction Act and what it does for climate change. We will talk about strategic roles for local governments beyond directly applying for the funds. And then we can also get into, or we'll also get into specifics by talking about the Inflation Reduction Act funding by issue area. And then we'll dive into some specific provisions around climate change. Next slide. Next slide as well. So the greatest share of the Inflation Reduction Act on climate funding goes to low carbon energy sources. We also have opportunities through the IRA to invest in healthier and efficient housing, manufacturing, and clean vehicles. Because the IRA was passed through the budget reconciliation process, their provisions are budgetary rather than regulatory. And we can talk more about that if we'd like during the Q&A. But the funding in the IRA is where local governments can take advantage of, again, local funding to optimize the benefits for your communities. And we see the climate-related provisions are primarily in the form of tax credits or other financial mechanisms. And there are definitely some smaller amounts available for grants. All that said, how we're able to take advantage of the unprecedented opportunity here depends on how agencies, individuals, and governments can take advantage of this funding. So that's one of the roles cities can play in engaging with the various stakeholders, is to ensure that they're able to take advantage of that funding in these programs as much as possible. And because there are multiple entities that will be eligible for this funding, there will also be a lot of opportunities for synergies among cities and other entities to apply for funding. And so there's going to be a really great need for coordination. And I'm sure a lot of you folks that are on the call working in government are already starting to see that. Next slide. So clearly this is called the Inflation Reduction Act because there is significant opportunities for savings, such as cost savings for shift in economic inclusion and workforce development. There is some money for training and workforce development, but a lot of it, again, is through the tax credits and provisions that have higher incentives for clean energy projects that pay prevailing wage and meet apprenticeship requirements. One role local governments can definitely play in engaging with industry, labor, and community colleges is through the trainings and apprenticeships programs. They can also lead by example by creating community benefit agreements that increase participation of underrepresented groups and increase contracting opportunities for minority and disadvantaged community enterprises. They can also help build an understanding of the type of jobs that will be created from the Inflation Reduction Act, like energy and building trades. Next slide. We also know that the Justice 40 is a priority for the Biden administration, and local governments have a number of roles to play in ensuring that the benefits of these programs go to communities that need it most. So local governments can work to make sure that community-based organizations are applying to those Justice 40 programs and meet all the programmatic requirements. They can help the administration identify gaps and the gaps in IRA implementation to ensure that the money is going to disadvantaged communities. And local governments can work to ensure that any funding they receive, that at least 40% of funding that they receive go to frontline organizations. A big part of this will be ensuring that you all are building also long-lasting relationships with frontline organizations and impacted communities and using those relationships to inform city priorities. Next slide. Go ahead to the next slide as well. So looking at some of the strategic role governments can play, we're really interested in going beyond just the funding that will be directly available for cities. But of course, climate mayors, and again, along with our partners at C40 and Urban Sustainability Directors Network, we'll be tracking this funding available for local governments and making sure our members are aware of those opportunities. But beyond that, local governments have the opportunity to protect against the damages that could come out of this. For example, fossil fuel operations that could exacerbate an already overburdened communities. There are opportunities for cities to partner with frontline communities, again, and community-based organizations to help them secure the grants that are available to community-based organizations, as well as helping individuals best use those tax credits is a great role for local governments to play. Also using local regulatory processes to streamline renewable energy deployment, battery storage, heat pumps, and all those opportunities to make sure that funding is going quickly and efficiently into communities, and investing in the staff training around those technologies as well. Local governments can also be engaging and coordinating with entities that have significant funding that will flow through states, tribes, utilities, and ports. Those are a number of ways local governments can engage on this direct funding, and we will certainly be supporting our membership as well through this. Next slide. Great, thank you. So what the guide attempts to do, because the bill is fairly complicated, if anyone, and I'm sure a lot of you folks did too, pick through the different texts or section by section. Our guide tries to sort of break that down in a little bit more simple way. And so it shows how the money will flow from various programs. And as the initial pie chart showed kind of back in one of the other slides, there's a lot of different mechanisms and a lot of different entities that will be eligible for this funding. So in the guide, we look at local governments, tribal governments, community-based organizations, and then individuals and businesses. And while the diagrams show where local governments will be directly eligible, I want to underscore that our organization, along with our other city climate partners, believe that local governments have a role to play in all of these investment streams, regardless of who is receiving that money. There is probably a role to play to make sure that the funding flows equitably to the projects within communities that local governments prioritize, but also making sure that any funding that goes through states also goes to cities. And we'll get into that more later. So the first sector in our guidebook is around air quality and greenhouse gas reduction. These are cross-cutting programs that in theory are meant to allow communities, states, and local governments to advance ideas they've already identified through their climate action plans or otherwise. You can see here there are a few programs that local governments will be directly eligible for, and this is the area of the bill where there will be the most opportunity for local governments to apply directly to programs, which I'll note more later. Next slide. In housing and commercial building space, there is a slightly different take. Most of the incentives in this part are through tax credits, and individual businesses will be eligible for those as well. So that's tax credits for things like building retrofits for new energy efficient buildings. And then in addition, the creation of 2 new rebate programs that will flow through states that will provide rebates for low and medium-sized households. Next slide. The next sector is resilience. And I'll note one thing for this sector, comparing the Inflation Reduction Act and the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or bipartisan infrastructure law. For resilience, there are a couple programs that fund resilience, but there are not as many resiliency programs in IRA as there were in IIJA/bill. The IRA is more focused on mitigation in that respect, but you can see a few noted here that local governments will be able to apply for through grants. Next slide. The next section is around clean vehicles. Another note of comparison, the Inflation Reduction Act funding almost is exclusively for funding for electric/clean vehicles. There are a few exceptions, but for, as another note of comparison, transit received much more funding in bipartisan infrastructure law than in IRA. So again, you can see that there are a lot of tax incentives here that individuals and businesses will be eligible for, and then a few programs that local governments will be eligible for directly. Next slide. And then finally, workforce development. And this is what I mentioned earlier. There are 2, maybe 3, depending on how you categorize it, will fund the workforce directly. And even more importantly, many of the tax credits in the bill were modified to include additional incentives for meeting prevailing wage or apprenticeship requirements. So it's a big incentive for businesses to support workforce development. Next slide. So also in our guidebook, we have these summary tables that list out the different programs under our respective sections. And this is not a comprehensive list of every program in the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a list of roughly 27 or so programs that we believe would be the most relevant to local governments and the folks you all work with in implementing climate action. So we organized this, again, section by various sectors. But in the table, you can find the language in the legislation that created these programs. Many of them are new. The funding amount, the mechanism, such as, is it a grant? Is it a tax credit? Is it through financing or loans? And within the sector focus area, it lists who is eligible. It also lists what agency is responsible for implementing that program and the time frame, if we know it, for next steps. So you can see here, these are the air quality and greenhouse gas reduction programs. And I will talk a little bit more about the first 2 programs, as these will likely be the most relevant for towns and cities. And that's the greenhouse gas pollution planning and implementation grants and the greenhouse gas reduction fund, which has also been nicknamed the Green Bank. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later. It's also worth noting regarding the tax credits. And I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the biggest changes in the Inflation Reduction Act from a policy perspective is the tax credits will now be directly available to local governments, tribal governments, or any non-tax paying entity. And what that will mean in practice is, there's a number of guidance that's come out related to the IRA tax credits, and we're still waiting on a number from Treasury as well, but it will allow local governments that in the past may not have taken advantage of tax credits through a third party to put solar on a building. But you'll no longer need to go through a third party to monetize tax credits, and it's likely going to be in the form of direct payment through the entity that will be installing the project, likely the local government. So it will just open up a new range of funding and financing for projects that we're excited about. And so this is for the clean energy tax credits and the tax credits for wind and solar, for some of the vehicle and EV charging tax credits. So could potentially be a really big game changer. Next slide. Oh. So this is the summary table for programs available for housing and commercial buildings. Again, to note, a lot of these are tax credits and new rebate programs that will run through state energy offices, but will be providing rebates to homeowners for energy efficiency and electrification retrofits for the first time. So our organization is excited about and encouraging local governments to engage with their state energy offices, if you all haven't already, on the development of these programs. Next slide. This is the summary table for programs related to resilience. Again, not as many in the Inflation Reduction Act as there were in bipartisan infrastructure law, but you can see here that it ranges from drought mitigation to urban forestry. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about the urban forestry program in a minute. Next slide. On clean vehicles, as I noted, tax credits are here for clean vehicles and for alternative refueling property, which again, could be EV charging. Those are now going to be open to governments to apply for, to access through the direct pay option. So that could be very meaningful for fleet electrification, but also your residents and business owners can take advantage of those tax credits directly as well. One new grant program that will be available is the Clean and Heavy Duty Vehicles program. Or grant. So that is open to businesses, local and tribal governments and other entities, and will provide it essentially for the purchase of clean heavy duty vehicles like garbage trucks, for example. And finally, the workforce development program is the one program that's dedicated to workforce development and is listed here. And again, I'll get more into that specific program in a moment. Next slide. So getting more into the greenhouse gas pollution planning and implementation grants, and orienting you on how to use our guide. So again, we have those summary tables, and if you're interested in diving more into the details of the program, in the summary table, you can click on the name of the program and it will take you to the summary table within the guide that provides more detail. And I'll stress this a little bit because most of these programs are new, and what we know about them are what's written into legislation. Some more information has sort of come out since the original guide was released about certain programs, but a lot of agencies are working towards getting the funding out the door. And part of that goes through some formal processes. The nice part about tax credits is that they take a more immediate effect, as again, a lot of you are most likely aware, and there will be guidance from Treasury on how to take advantage of certain tax credits. But the grant programs, again, have to go through a formal process, through request for information, and then there have to be issued formal rules on how to access the funding. So that will take a little bit more time. So for each of these programs, we've had the summary tables that give you more descriptions on the programs and key features on what will be funded. And then critically within some of these programs, we highlight the opportunities for environmental justice. And this goes back to the point of Justice 40. So again, all the programs in the Inflation Reduction Act will be covered by the Biden administration's commitment that 40% of the benefits will flow to 40% low income and disadvantaged communities. So we give some prompts in the guide for how to start to think about that and how to use these programs to advance solutions to communities that have been most impacted by climate change. So here's the summary for the greenhouse gas planning and implementation grants. The program reads that if a climate action plan, an innovative program or project that you haven't been able to identify funding for, this program is intended to be flexible enough to invest in that idea. And the EPA came out with some additional information regarding this program this past week or so, and they'll be announcing more information about the non-competitive planning grants as soon as March 1st. So more information on that to come, but this program will be very valuable for local governments, especially those that may not have other funding available to advance their climate action plans. Next slide. One additional program I'll mention, because it's the largest single pot of funding in the bill, is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's that $27 billion fund split into 3 buckets. One pot is for $7 billion for local governments that could be used for directly eligible for folks on a competitive basis and for programs that advance zero emission energy technologies. Again, EPA recently came out with some initial guidance on this after the request for information process late last year that stipulates the use for residential rooftop solar, community solar, and associated storage and upgrades in low and disadvantaged communities. And the EPA notes that they are expected to make up to 60 grants for this competition. And the remainder of the fund will be used to create financing programs. And so that's that additional $20 billion bucket, which has been deemed the general and low income and disadvantaged communities competitive grants. And that's intended to be a fund for a national network of eligible nonprofit entities who will then facilitate the technical assistance and capacity building necessary to strengthen community-based organizations, small businesses, et cetera, to transition to an equitable net zero economy. And the EPA notes that they are expected to make between 2 and 15 grants under this competition. And so for this fund specifically, it's going to be moving very quickly because the law stipulates the money needs to be distributed and out of the EPA by the end of 2024. And they need to start the process by this year, which I believe they're expected to do this summer. The difference is that they don't need to fund all the projects necessarily. They just need to get the money out the door for entities that will be financing projects. So the program is on a fast track, and more information, again, will be coming out in the next few months. But this will be a really great program for local governments to try and take advantage of. Next slide. Another program I wanted to highlight is the assistance for the latest and zero building energy code adoption. It's a program that local governments will be eligible for. And this is the $1 billion program that will be distributed over 7 years to help states and local governments adopt and enforce the latest building energy codes. And this is especially helpful for state and local governments that have lacked the capacity to do this. And there's a lot of money for a very specific use. We expect the money will flow through state energy offices, and then the Department of Energy will be asking those offices to put forth plans on how they will use this money. And if you all have the authority to adopt your own energy codes, which, as you know, varies state to state, you'll be able to seek funding directly. And just a few more program highlights, and then we'll open it up to questions. Next slide. So another program I just wanted to highlight was the one related to resilience area portion of our guidebook, the Urban and Community Forestry Program. This will be administered through USDA and the Forest Service, and it will provide $1.5 billion over 10 years specifically for forestry efforts in city towns. So this is, again, specific for the Forest Service, and so these grants will be available for tree planting and prioritize under-resourced populations and areas, which is really exciting for local governments that have already taken some approaches with planting tree canopies. And so it's great to see a program that will directly support that. And the timeline is specified, but expected sometime in 2023. Next slide. Commercial vehicles. On this front, this is one of those tax credits that were only previously available for businesses, but now local governments will be eligible for directly. And just wanted to note some of the details here. It could be a big deal because it's up to $40,000 for heavy clean duty vehicles. So this could go towards the purchase of new heavy duty vehicles that are either electric or zero emission technologies. And I realize that some of the upfront costs to purchasing those types of vehicles can be a real barrier for cities. So this could be potential for accelerating some of those fleet electrification efforts. Additionally, if any staff or local leaders on the call that are interested in electrifying their fleets or procuring more vehicles with commercial clean vehicle tax credits, Climate Mayors partners with the Electrification Coalition to help identify ways for your city to do this. So if this is of interest, again, feel free to reach out afterwards, and our organization can get you connected with our partners. Next slide. And finally, the Workforce Development Program, the Home Energy Efficiency Contractor Training Program, which is a $200 million workforce development program that will be administered by the Department of Energy and then flow through state energy offices. And again, I'm sure you're sensing a theme and have already sort of sensed this in the IRA, that a lot of funding will be going through states. So we've definitely been encouraging local governments to reach out to state energy offices if they haven't already. And again, we believe that's a really great place for local governments to engage with a critical stakeholder in this process. But this program will directly fund workforce development programs to support energy efficiency retrofits. And there are a bunch more programs in the guide itself, but I just wanted to walk through the different elements of our guide. And I'll note before we turn it over to questions, we do plan with, again, C40 and some other folks to update this guide with the emerging guidelines of critical IRA programs. And again, we're in a bit of a transition this month with a lot more guidance coming out. But we're going to start linking these guidebooks and sort of addendums to our guidebook to actual web pages to make this process a little bit easier for local governments to wrap their heads around. And there'll be a link to the guidebook at the end of this for folks. And so if you get that link, you can bookmark it. And right now it lives on C40's website at the moment. But if you click back to that, it'll sort of, we're hoping to have some more guides in the future that'll be helpful for folks. And as more information becomes available, we can help local governments manage all the information on these programs. Next slide. Again, here is the link to the guidebook that we'll share after the fact. And if folks want to grab emails, that's there too, but we can start to dig into some Q&A portion of the webinar.
Well, great. Thank you, Megan, for that presentation. We do have a number of questions that have come in. I'd like to start with one that I have myself. Two questions, actually. The first is, in general, what is the timing of the guidance coming from Treasury Department and of program, details for grants from EPA, DOE, and other agencies? Is this money, in other words, going to be flowing this year, or is it likely to be something that will take a year, this year to put together everything that's needed to get the money out there? That's my first question.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair one. I think in regards to the first question on tax credits, I think Treasury has been trying to roll out the tax credit guidance as quickly as possible. And so there's a number of tax credits that I know local governments and a lot of folks are waiting on guidance for. In terms of timing, I don't have a great idea of that. That's one of the things my organization is working in partnership to sort of get a handle on when those roll out, just how to take advantage of those. And then, but again, as I mentioned before, once the tax credits are available and that guidance is out by the Treasury, those can generally be taken advantage of immediately. With regard to some of the other grant programs through Department of Energy or through the Environmental Protection Agency, that's going to depend on the program to be rolled out. So, for example, there's a current request for information for the home energy rebates that'll be available for residents. But that funding likely won't start to roll out until next year. So it really depends on the programs that each office is going to be rolling out. But there is a lot of funding and grant opportunities that are in the works now, and they're going to start being rolled out over the next few months, which again is part of my job to track and try to push out to local governments to apply for as quickly as possible. But again, it's going to be very fast moving. And so we're trying to keep an eye on that.
Thanks. My second question, and then I'll get into questions that have come in on the chat, is there's been a lot of press coverage recently, and I believe there was some effort to clarify how the tax credits, and I guess these would be grants for cities, would apply to electric vehicles based upon the origin of the battery systems, I believe, primarily, whether they're US made, foreign made. And, there are questions about, where the lithium comes from, all that. So is it clear what vehicles at this point are eligible so people can get their credit if they buy a vehicle that's electric? And is this a problem with heavy duty vehicles and medium duty trucks and buses, or just light duty cars? In terms of the grants for cities, when will they know what vehicles will be eligible for these grants and credits in terms of, models of vehicles? There's so many different types of vehicles and models.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I think the most of the question that's going to be relevant for likely local governments, but and individuals as well, is going to be well, more so for local governments, is going to be the commercial clean vehicle tax credit, and again, like you mentioned, the heavy duty vehicles as well. Right now, the Treasury Department has up on their website a list of vehicles that are eligible for the tax credit for individuals to take advantage of. And then there's also information online for the commercial clean vehicle credit. In terms of the different models that will be available, that is something that we are working with our partners at Electrification Coalition to help local governments identify within the tax credit itself what's good for their fleets, as well as pooled procurement of commercial vehicles and what that looks like. And so there is some initial guidance on who's eligible for the tax credit and what to sort of have. But I leave it up to our partners there to sort of help identify what some of the potential vehicles will be. And I can, if anyone's more interested on the commercial clean vehicle credit side of things, happy to talk offline and connect you with our more specified experts that might be able to help any needs at that point.
Great. So we'll get into some questions now from people online here. One of the questions that's come up is, and I know there's quite a bit of interest in this in Southern California, is how this would potentially help fund community solar systems, so that systems that are small scale and located within the distribution systems of utilities could be subscribed to by businesses, people who rent apartments or live in condos, that sort of thing, that can't put solar on their roof, but would like to support local solar that's in the distribution network. Is it something that a nonprofit could avail itself of the funding? A city? How would that work?
Yeah. So again, there's definitely a lot of different incentives within the Inflation Reduction Act for rooftop or community solar. Again, it also will depend on the city's priorities and how they want to access and take advantage of that funding. And so, as I mentioned before, in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that's an opportunity where nonprofits could potentially take a look at that, or even local governments. There's sets asides for specifically community rooftop solar for low income and disadvantaged communities, along with a lot of other incentives throughout the piece of legislation. But again, that's one program example. So there are definitely ways for local governments to take advantage of the grants and other financing mechanisms within the bill to promote rooftop solar, and that'll just depend on what their priorities are and how they want to use that funding, and also what they have capacity for. So at least in my role, we've heard a lot of in terms of local government's capacity to actually apply for this funding and what that looks like. And so I think that'll also just depend on the local entity or the nonprofit, but there's definitely plenty of opportunities within the bill itself for those types of technologies.
I had a burning question. I hope you don't mind. This is Martha.
Hey, Martha.
Yes, I wonder if they're prepared to set aside those funds that they're aiming for some low-income communities. I think you mentioned something about 40%.
Yep.
And I think those very communities or cities are the ones that don't have resources to quickly put together all this stuff. And so it sounds like it's a race for access to the funds, because it sounds like a lot of money, but a lot of these measures cost a lot of money. So I'm wondering how they're going to use that. How are they balancing between, trying to help out cities that need a lot more support funding and their capacity to request grants and things before somebody else comes in.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very fair question. And I think that's a part of what the bill attempts to do in honing in to make sure that the funds are going towards that with that 40% commitment. But I think in addition to that, trying to not only directly into communities, but the co-benefits that it could provide and what that might look like. And I think that's something that the federal government agencies are grappling with, is how do we provide either technical assistance or provide those communities that are going to need it or want it through the statutes of the bill, and what that's going to look like. I know that's something our organization is also trying to work on as well, is, providing support to local governments to take advantage of this that may not necessarily have the capacity again. But that's definitely something that the agencies are trying to do. They're trying to get the information out there. They're trying to, work with different nonprofits as much as they can, or community-based organizations or local governments to work with community-based organizations so that the funding can be deployed as quickly as possible. I don't think I have a golden nugget answer in terms of the best way to do that. I think in these cases, especially for local governments, it's gonna depend by region or by a city itself. And a lot of that, at least what we're trying to talk through with our federal partners, is making it a little bit easier for local governments to access the grant programs that are going to be available under IRA, whether that look like a one-page letter that says, here's what I want to do, how do you help me? That doesn't exist right now, but that's something that we talk about sometimes. And or just helping them disseminate that information as quickly as possible and sort of be concierges in the middle. But I think the federal government is working to try and connect those dots for those programs as much as possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I lost my internet connection, apparently. I apologize.
It's okay, Bill. Martha stepped in with a burning question she had, so.
Okay, great. I also had to reconnect from scratch, so I've lost the chat with the questions in it, but I'll ask a couple that I do recall. One of them is, we have a lot of smaller cities who are contract cities. They basically contract for fire, police with the county sheriffs and county fire. What would you recommend to such a city as the best way to tap into this money and use it locally, assuming also that they don't operate their own municipal utility?
That's a great question. And I would love to follow up with you or any city that knows of that, because I don't know if I'm going to be the best equipped to know how or recommend how to apply. I think the best way to do that would be to reach out to the state office, or even try to connect you with our federal partners who might be better suited to answer that question.
Could a small city like that does contract for services partner with the agencies such as the sheriff's department or fire, or with the private, for instance, waste management companies that pick up waste to for instance, get clean fueled vehicles, electric vehicles for those services within the city?
Are you asking how they can take advantage of that, or?
Yeah, if they could partner, with a private contractor, such as a waste hauler, or with another agency.
For applying for those funds?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as there's, I don't know in terms of pooling the different funding for like private versus other types, but I think if the eligible entity meets the requirements under the whatever program they're applying to, whether that be the clean heavy duty vehicles program, or if they apply through the tax credit, they could potentially be eligible. But I think that's it's a case by case basis.
Okay. We had another question that came in regarding whether cities could get together and form like a special district or work through a something like the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments to do shared programs.
I believe Bill's just breaking up a little bit. Just want to make sure it's not my Wi-Fi connection. So if any of the other panelists can just give me a quick thumbs up to make sure it's not me.
It's not you.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
I've sent them to Martha, so hope maybe Martha, you need to take over.
Sorry, everyone, for the technical hiccups of Zoom.
You can't get rid of me.
No, it's great. I'm here for it. But I think I got the gist of Bill's question before he flickered up. In terms of, I think, cities being able to apply together in sort of a regional cohort. I think, again, and this is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but also a realistic answer in terms of that. I think it'll depend on the program and the guidance that comes out. I know our organization is always supportive of cities trying to work together to, in the capacities they can, either again through commercial fleet procurement or otherwise, on funding, if that's what's going to be, if there's like a collective action to do that. But I think it'll really depend on the program itself and what you're applying to, and the priorities for that collective group of cities.
Thank you. Another question. These are actually related questions, but the city of Pasadena has a municipal electric utility, and it is striving to reach 100% renewable energy by 2030. It has a gas power plant in Pasadena, and one of the questions asked if that were to be replaced with batteries to store more solar and maybe to upgrade transmission to move more solar power or wind power into the area to store in those batteries, how would the IRA help?
I think that if the municipality wants to and is eligible to apply for IRA funding for transmission lines, I know there's some grant funding in there for transmission, as well as battery storage options. I think that's a place to do it through the Department of Energy. So that's one way they could do it. I know IIJA also has a number of grid deployment options as well. I'm not going to speak too much to IIJA, but I know that that has some funding in there as well that's available for municipalities. But I would say that there's definitely some incentive programs in the IRA that they can take advantage of.
And the municipal utility there in Pasadena is currently putting together an integrated resources plan update. This is right after this resolution was passed by the council to move to 100% clean energy. So could the plan that they're developing, the integrated resource plan, actually incorporate presumed funding, for specific facilities or measures that might be in the plan?
I would say that's up to the entity and how they are able to put that together and what they want to prioritize in terms of how they access or what funding they want to access to get to their reduction goals. I think a lot of the cases with local governments that we've seen or other types of municipalities is, they know the funding and grants are available or other types of incentives and financial mechanisms. But, they don't always have, again, the capacity to apply. And so there is this just revolving door situation where they sometimes need a full baked grant, but they don't have the time to necessarily apply to it because they don't know if they're going to get it. And so it's a question of like, are they able to even integrate that into their plans if they're not sure if they're going to be receiving that grant? All that to say that not trying to, make anyone not to apply and do their due diligence. But I think at least on our end, we're trying to encourage as many local governments and as many folks as possible to take advantage of the incentives that are in the Inflation Reduction Act as possible, and see where it works. And if you're not sure how, our folks are here to help steward that as much as possible. And that's part of what, and again, that comes to, specific preferences and priorities for local governments and what they want to achieve. But we're definitely trying to, in a way, make sure that the investments are deployed as efficiently and effectively as possible. So if that fits into what the entity is doing, then by all means, they should include it.
Thanks. I had a question of my own, and that is that there is a push in California to electrify buildings, homes and commercial businesses. And I believe there is funding available for things like heat pumps, that sort of thing through this. But what kind of support is available to cities to actually formulate ordinances and then to administer them on an ongoing basis? Will this help cities that want to do that?
Absolutely. So there's a number of programs, again, the one that I had mentioned earlier in terms of building energy code adoption, but there's going to be, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for upgrades of buildings, whether that be commercial buildings, residential buildings, or affordable housing buildings as well. And what that looks like in the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, a lot of these programs are still being rolled out. But I think what the short answer is yes. And I think building decarbonization is a huge priority for a lot of our member cities. And I think, and I know you mentioned the heat pumps as well. The home rebates program, as I mentioned before, that's one of the programs that tries to incentivize that type of technology. And that's going to be something that this legislation is going to be able to incentivize residents take advantage of, as well as other programs for local governments.
There was a question that came in earlier, and it was related to, again, Pasadena Water and Power, but I think it applies to all electric utilities. And that is, prices are going up for power service, and renewable energy and facilities to bring it, from places where it's made to where it's used, are needed. And so utilities have to spend on that. How should a utility work with this bill in terms of tapping money in a way that could help low-income customers and protect them against those rate hikes, from essentially having a lower standard of living, due to the rising cost of power? What opportunities are there for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I am the best person to talk about what a utility should sort of do in this space. Again, our focus is going to be more on how local governments can take advantage of this. And if that's a priority for Pasadena local government. And I know there's a lot of different types of utilities and different community choice aggregators in certain areas and municipalities. But I'd say I'm not the best person to sort of speak to how utilities can sort of hone in to make sure that there's no rate hikes necessarily. But I'm happy to follow up and try and to get more into that question.
Well, rate hikes, but also I'm thinking in terms of energy efficiency and using money from the IRA to improve the energy efficiency of low-income customer households, which even though the power is going up, their use comes down. So maybe they can stay even. Is that something that would be possible in your view?
Again, I'd have to dig more into the question and talk with some of our other partners that I think could speak more to utility rate hikes and how to sort of prevent that. But I think the main goal of both within the Inflation Reduction Act and some of these other pieces of legislation that have major investments in infrastructure is trying to provide more grid efficiency upgrades, additional transmission lines, so that there can be deployment of renewable technology in and around our cities and within states, and to hopefully sort of in general keep that lower. So I think big picture, that's what is in IRA and some of these other investments. But on that specific question, I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, but we have another question, which is about climate mayors itself, and that is there are a lot of cities in the nation, and you have many who belong. How are you reaching out to build membership and to get more cities on board with addressing climate change?
So I would say we are a tiny but mighty team at Climate Mayor. So I'm the policy director. Our executive director, Kate Wright, has been with the organization the longer than me, but she started a while before. And then we also have a staffer who is focused on membership and communications opportunities. And so at our organization, we sort of have a structure of our leadership team, which is right now the chair, Mayor Rhodes Conway of Madison, Wisconsin. And then we have our two vice chairs, which is Mayor Kate Gallego of Phoenix and Mayor Bibb of Cleveland. And then we also have our chair emeritus, which is the mayor of Houston, which is Mayor Sylvester Turner. And so those are our leadership folks who at different points throughout the year, not at different points throughout the year, but throughout the year, are working to engage both our membership base, but also expanding our membership base, especially this next year. Mayor Rhodes Conway's priorities is to try and both engage our members on these historic investments, but also grow and expand it as well. And then we also have a broader base of steering committee members as well within Climate Mayors. And then beyond that, trying to engage members in, again, different opportunities to showcase these investments, connect them with our federal partners and what that looks like. For myself, trying to, and our team, connecting with the staff within our team, within the leadership team and our steering committee staff as much as possible. But also within our membership base and reaching out to folks. I think for me, the simplest way is sort of expanding our network is trying to keep an eye on the news and seeing what mayors are doing, which is sort of a probably, new age way to do it, rather than the good old word of mouth. But I think just trying to keep a pulse on who's doing good work, whatever that looks like, whether that be through a new climate action plan or through different resiliency mitigation strategies for a city. I think that's something that we try to keep an eye out for and say, hey, this person's doing great work. We should reach out to them. It's as simple as that.
One other related question is, particularly in small cities, mayors are appointed usually for 1 year and then someone else is appointed the next year. Is the membership based on the mayor or is it the city? And does the membership continue even though the mayor may change?
So it's a little bit of both, right? So it's focused on the mayor, and so we want to make sure that any new mayor is also committed to continuing to be a member. And so we sort of track that. And it's again, it's focused on the mayor, but it's, you know, still the city. So if we have the city of Eugene, Oregon, you know, we're going to want to make sure that if there's a new mayor, that they're also going to be a climate mayor and what that looks like. So so
Okay.
we still ask for commitments when there's a new mayor.
Great, thank you. We have some more questions. One of them is when programs are implemented through states,
Mhm.
how are the dollar amounts assigned to the states? And then the other question is when there are grants that they would administer, you know, how, well, in other words, how much of the funding for local government that's envisioned here actually would be flowing through the state so that the state would have some role in dispersing it to the localities within its borders?
Yeah, so I think a large majority of the programs, both in the Inflation Reduction Act, is through states, sort of as I mentioned in just some of the example programs that are going to be flowing through state energy offices. And so a lot of that is decided oftentimes at the federal level through federal formula, through a federal formula, and so that it's distributed based on state population and other factors as well. And then would be distributed to state, or in theory would then be distributed to those different state energy or air offices for local governments. And I think that was the whole host of your question. But to just extend it further, because so much of that is going through state offices, what we've been working to sort of advocate for, but also sort of make sure that our mayors are engaged on, is making sure that the funding that goes through states isn't just going to go to cities that may not necessarily, it should go to cities with priority areas, but either that the state isn't rejecting the funding completely, or that it is still accessible for local governments. So that in the case that if a state rejects any sort of funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, it's not just going to go into a competitive grant for, again, other states to apply for. It should then be offered to the cities within that state as well to then take advantage of. Let me know if I did not answer the full part of that question.
No, that's fine. Another question, and I'm not sure how late we'll go. My internet connection is apparently very unstable, but so I apologize for the disjointed nature. But the other question that came in that I thought was a good one is that basically you have different types of systems for delivering power here, and you have so you have the municipal utilities, you've got the investor-owned utilities, and then the what's known as the Clean Power Alliance, which is a CCA. So the question is really, are all of these entities that may overlap with one another, you know, potentially competing against one another for the same dollars in the same area? How is the money, you know, rationalized, I guess, to get the most emission reductions and good out of it when it comes to an area like this, which is fairly complicated in terms of the way power is provided to customers, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. I you know, I'm maybe gonna less speak to the community, the aggregator side of this, and maybe more to, you know, how programs may be prioritized. And I think that is one of the processes, or not processes, but I think that is one of the things that we are seeing with a lot of the rollout of these Inflation Reduction Act programs is, as I mentioned, those requests for information are tools that the federal agencies use to solicit public feedback that I know a lot of folks are probably very familiar with, but I think part of those programmings and what the federal agencies tried to be pretty as intentional as they can be is, and this was the case for during the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was, and even the Climate Pollution Planning and Implementation Grant RFIs, is how do they, or what are the best ways to prioritize programs? And I think that'll come out again as guidance is rolled out of the programs and how folks can apply. I think that's a fair question to ask the agency, or even if we can help facilitate that, is like, this is what we want to do. You know, how are you prioritizing this, and what's the best ways for our project of the thing that we want to do can cut through that so we can access that funding. And I think that's a question that a lot of local governments are trying to figure out as well, and what is going to make that biggest impact. And I think that's a question that the federal agencies are probably grappling with as well, as they're going to be getting a lot of applications. So I think it's one of those, you know, there's obviously going to be a lot of competition, but I think if there's a way that local governments can sort of support their own projects or their own climate action plans to get to the reductions that they need to, and again, this funding is available for that. I think look at it as more as an opportunity to just take advantage of that. And if folks have more questions of what you all can do to get that funding, again, I'm happy to try and be a resource and connector for any of what you all are trying to do. But I think big picture, that is something that a lot of folks are in the same boat thinking about, and how best to maybe not so much compete, but make the impacts that they can, so that they can, you know, get to 100% renewable and provide the benefits that they would like to for their communities.
Well, thanks. We have another question. You're probably aware that the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are the biggest sources of, are among the biggest sources of air pollution, smog forming air pollution, and big sources of greenhouse gases too in this region. And you did mention that there is some money available for port cleanup. Could you say a little bit more about what that might look like?
I mean, I can try. I know it's available. I would say our organization hasn't been the most active in terms of ports. And that's something that we're also trying to expand into as well. And for additional context, our organization used to be a one-person executive director. So we're still a tiny but mighty team. And there's only so much information my lovely brain can hold on each program. So I would say I can follow up with additional information on the different port programs, but can't really speak to them right now.
Another question is with trains here in this area. I mean, there are 200 trains a day that run for Metrolink, which are, I believe, clean diesel. Mm-hmm. And then we have freight trains as well, traveling from the ports or from various rail yards. So is money going to be available to clean up locomotives, to move to electrifying locomotives or running them on hydrogen?
Yeah, great question. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the available funding for electrifying is going to be likely through the electric vehicles or fleets or large heavy duty vehicles. Again, I can follow up on freight, but a lot of that is also going to be through the investment, the IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure bill. I know that has a lot of freight funding.
Okay, Great. And then getting a lot of questions. One more here. People that live in apartments they can't do much about energy efficiency of their unit, other than turn the thermostat down, I suppose. Are there opportunities here to increase energy efficiency in apartment buildings? And is that something that cities can partner in with building owners and help them access funding that's available?
Yeah, I mean, I think local governments can definitely try to do what they can to help with that. I think that's a question that we've heard a lot of in terms of how renters can take advantage of this. And I think that's going to be sort of a case by case basis for whether that be, and I know there's a lot of different building types, right? So I'm not going to speak to as if I know like the different players in that space, but I think the way that we've often been thinking about it is again those tax credits and I think if there's and I think we're going to start seeing this more of like how can local governments help, even maybe not even it should be renters, but all folks who own or rent a home, how can they take advantage of these investments, and say for even the home rebates, what can local governments do to sort of try and get these incentives? And I know I keep using the home rebates program as an example. It's on my mind. But I think there's a part to play that local governments can sort of help facilitate those conversations with building owners or with affordable housing units to sort of make those upgrades and try, I think, maybe focus less on, and I think acknowledging those barriers and pushing that up through as they're coming through, right? Like I think that's another thing of the federal government or even state agencies, depending on your relationship, or I think hearing more and more of. And I think the thing to focus on is how can we still, again, gravitate towards get these to folks, and what barriers sort of are along the way that we can sort of help facilitate folks to take advantage of that. And again, if folks are starting to hear more and more of this of like this sense, like I think those are very valuable perspectives in that local governments can play in offering that to federal and state agencies to say like, what we obviously want to take advantage of this, but here's the challenges that we're facing, and how can we solve this to better the public health of our lived space.
Well, thanks. Well, I know that we're well into this, and I did want to extend an opportunity for more questions to be typed into the chat and or the Q&A, I should say. So I'll give a minute for people to do that if anyone has a last few questions. But I'll pose one more for you, and that is with air districts in California. There are a number of air districts. What sort of eligibility will they have for funding from this, and how could they use that money? Currently, they have a lot of grant programs that are state funded. Mm-hmm. That's the money is passed down from Sacramento, and they incentivize a number of things from electric lawnmowers and leaf blowers, to heavy duty trucks. So how could they make use of this money and help get it out to clean up?
The air districts specifically? Yeah. I'd have to again, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on every state agency, and so I'm happy to see how those air could potentially fit into one of the molds of eligibility of certain programs. I know that there are some programs in the bill that stipulate that state air offices can get funding, so I imagine that would likely be the case of, again, if funding flows through the states, those the air districts would potentially be eligible for funding that way. But I think, again, in all of this coordination, the air districts being eligible for funding regardless, I think our focus is, again, how can local governments work with those entities in their climate action goals and improving air quality or other priorities that they have that align with the overall goal of reducing emissions.
The amounts listed in the presentation and in the guidebook, are those maximum amounts or projected? What are those amounts based on? Are they fixed in the legislation, or is it just projections based on expectations of how many people will seek tax credits and grants and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the grant programs are in the tax incentives are all based off the pieces within the text of the legislation. And again, this goes back to how the Inflation Reduction Act was originally passed and some of the stipulations that were needed through the reconciliation process, which is a purely budgetary process. And so with that, you have to have and identify budgetary numbers in each of those programs and what it will fund. So those are quote unquote fixed amounts. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but those are the amounts that are stipulated in the law.
Thank you. And I think maybe this can be our near to last, or if not last question is, there's a lot of interest in your presentation, and a lot of people are asking how people can stay in touch with climate mayors to keep attuned to, the details of when the money will become available and how to seek it and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We love to hear that. If you are a staffer of any local government organization, and or know mayors in the area that might want to get involved with this, would love to get connected with them. For other folks or cities that may not, have capacity, and being a member is not an arduous process or anything. So it's a fairly simple process for mayors to be involved. But you can stay up to date. Feel free to email me from myself or the info@climatemayors.org. But we will be trying to put together sort of an addendum to this and releasing it likely on that C40 landing page, that if you click on that link, that it will take you to the IRA guidebook. The intention is to have additional iterations of that, and that will be the landing page there for additional information.
Well, thank you. And I think that concludes the presentation. So I'd like to show some applause for Megan. She's spent a lot of time and answered a lot of questions tonight. So thank you again, Megan. And I'm going to turn it back over to Martha Zavala. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a really great presentation, Megan. I really appreciate the fact that you've come here to help us out. I hope you can hear me and you can see me.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So we hope maybe you can come back to us. Maybe you can share some of the contact information. We normally send out an email message to all our participants and let them know where they can access you. I know you gave that information at the conclusion of your presentation, but we would certainly use it again and share it with everyone so they'll have a way to get in touch with climate mayors and sort of track the information that you've been offering, to make it simple for people to kind of go down a column that says, what am I interested in? Here's the topic. How do I get my hands on that funding? And start going to town on taking some climate action, some real aggressive moves. I do hope that they figure out how to distribute that, 40% that's set aside for the low-income communities and those that are the most impacted by the environment. We have those communities living by the harbors, and it's really a sad state of affairs. Some of those cities can't gear up on their own. So thank you very much for showing us how we can help our cities get their hands on that money. And if it is a California state funnel through, I'm sure they'll come out with direction on how they're supposed to access those funds. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me. I really appreciated it, and hope everybody has a lovely evening.
Yes, thank you. Now we do have another part of our program. Thank you, Megan. I would like to ask Laura Fleming to come on. Laura, hopefully you can introduce yourself. I lost my notes and all the excitement.
Well, I think I lost what I was going to send to you anyway, but hi, I'm Laura Fleming. I'm a Pasadena resident. I'm also the Environmental Sustainability Manager at Polytechnic School. And I have sort of two focuses. One is to help decarbonize our campus, and the other is to essentially advise our students who are passionate about climate action and help them shepherd projects that they try to implement on campus, and to also help them learn more about civics and to speak out about issues they care about at city council meetings, et cetera. So that's who I am. And I am here because I was asked to do an advocacy statement. And would you like me to go ahead, Martha?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have two audiences here tonight. I don't know who is still on, but we have both city government agency personnel as well as just members of the general public and obviously the league. So for city leaders and staff, I hope this was that you got some good insights about available funding to help you pursue more projects to reduce greenhouse gases. And, as cities transition away from fossil fuels, infrastructure costs are inevitable. We all know that. And we hope that this funding might help reduce economic impacts both on cities and on residents. And as cities consider physical costs, they must equally consider the social costs of carbon, all the economic damages that result from continuing to emit carbon into the atmosphere, and inaction costs as well. And we don't have time to lose, and we hope that cities will plan and execute this transition now so we have a fighting chance to keep our planet livable for us and for future generations. So we hope that you'll please act with the urgency that our climate emergency demands. And for the rest of us, we need everyone. So thank you for being here today to educate yourselves about how the IRA can help cities fund greenhouse gas reduction projects. And so what can you do specifically? You can get involved in helping cities make this transition. And the League makes it easier with its 10 Actions project that Martha discussed earlier. The National League, as well as the Pasadena Area League, have created a guiding document called 10 Actions that cities can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see from the slide, there are 4 categories: moving away from fossil fuels, electrification of buildings, electrification of vehicles, as well as reducing vehicle use. So all of these actions are really important. And where do you begin? First, you can join an organization that's focused on some of these actions. In my case, it was by joining the League of Women Voters Natural Resources Committee that I was introduced to Pasadena 100, a grassroots organization that's razor focused on terminating fossil fuel contracts for electricity. And I mentioned I work at a school, and so I was able to contribute by getting youth involved in Pasadena 100's Clean Energy Rally, and to get students to speak at city council meetings when clean energy was on the agenda. Youth voice really matters. And the second thing I'd say is just become informed, read your city council meeting agendas, and know what they're discussing and voting on. And ask for a topic to be agendized and rally other interested residents to attend and speak at the meetings or submit written comments, and also get to know your district council representative. Third, find out what other community groups have been able to do to affect change. We already talked about the Pasadena 100 example and the new resolution that was just passed. And if you can't find a group, the League's National Resources Committee is a terrific resource and has committees like subcommittees focused on things like electrification. You can also reach out to local chapters of the Sierra Club or the Audubon Society, or here we have active San Gabriel Valley, to find others who are as passionate as you might be about making progress. And the last thing I'd say is that it's really important to engage youth in this cause. It's incredibly powerful. Climate change is the #1 global worry for young people today, and it has been for 6 years. Talk to the young people you know, connect them to others other youth who care about climate change, and ask them to speak at a city government meeting. One action leads to another. When you get involved, doors open. So just take the first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I really appreciate your having brought up the fact that you got engaged through the League. So I will invite all the rest of you to join us too. It's really a fantastic organization, and we try to make sure that everybody who wants to take action is able to do that. You know, we're a voting rights organization, among other things, but one of the reasons we went after the vote was so that we could have a public voice, the right to get engaged in governing and self-governance is really the goal that we're after, and we continue to work at after 103 years, which we just celebrated on February 14th. So we really take our role as a civic education organization, giving people information to help them make decisions about their own lives and kind of take control over that. So thank you very much for mentioning that. And we just have a few announcements, so hang in here with us, please, because we also have another program coming up on March 2nd that some of you may have some interest in. It's our Thursday with the League. This is at 10 a.m. It's a Zoom webinar. Again, you don't have to drive anywhere. You can have your cup of coffee next to you and write notes as you listen to the crisis at the border and what is it really about, and what can League members do? What can you do as a community member? Because I think all of us are touched by the issues of immigration in one way or the other. So just go to our website. You can register there. We have a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you directly to our website, so you can look for the events that we have coming up. I do believe that we will be posting this option to register for our March 2nd webinar shortly. So please do that. And we hope you enjoyed this program. Look for the complete video on the League of Women Voters Pasadena area YouTube channel. You go to that QR code, and on the left-hand side navigation panel, you will be able to see that we do have a YouTube channel, and you can click through there. In a couple of days, it'll be ready for you to view. I want to thank you, Laura, again. And Bill, thank you for moderating today's event. You did a great job. Internet issues notwithstanding, I'm usually the one who has those. And I want to thank our Zoom team, our events team, for putting this together. Thank you, Pasadena Media, for recording this again. Remember that we're going to make the video available. We'll make sure you all have access to that. And let your friends and family know so that they can get excited about climate action. It's going to take all of us. The transition that cities are trying to make are not going to be able to make it on their own. It really does require all of us, and we're all going to live through that change. I know that some of us have experienced quite a bit of it already, but there's going to be more to come. If we're really going to do this right, we will be experiencing a change. I'm one of these people who, really hangs on to my gas stove because I like to burn my tortillas right directly over the over the burner. And I'll just have to figure out another way to do it. So I want to thank you and our wonderful audience for sharing your evening with us. Go forth and make a difference. Thank you.